Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Miles. I'm the head of cognitive science at Scottish Brain Sciences, and so I do a lot of the kind of memory and thinking assessments and the kind of oversight of that. And I'm joined here today with my colleagues Denise Fraser and Sarah Gregory. So if you don't mind just briefly introducing yourself, that'd be great.
Hi everyone. So yeah, my name is Denise Fraser. I am Marketing and Communications Manager at Scottish Brain Sciences. So I'll be managing today's webinar, managing the Q&A afterwards, and just a bit of housekeeping, just to let everybody know this. We're recording the webinar, so it will be available to view afterwards. For the Q&A, if you can please use the Q&A function, so you'll see a little box at the bottom of your screen called Q&A. If you pop your questions in there at any point throughout the webinar, and we will look to address those at the end. And finally, if anybody's experiencing any technical issues, if you could just please email me at d.fraser@brainsciences.scot. I've put that in the chat, and I'll see if I can sort that out. Thanks, Miles.
Super. Thanks both. And I'm Dr. Sarah Gregory. I head up our internal studies within Scottish Brain Sciences. So by that we mean any of the studies that we design ourselves, sponsor ourselves, and run within our centres. So I'll tell you about a couple of the projects a bit later on, and also tell you a little bit more about how you can get involved with us. But I'll hand back to Miles for the start of the webinar.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're just going to start with a couple of questions. I'm hoping everyone can see my slides here just before I start cracking on. So we've got a couple of questions just about your kind of background. So if you don't mind just filling those in, just so we can get an idea of who we have on the call today. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so basically the format for today is I'm going to start by giving a bit of a background into Scottish Brain Sciences, and then I'm going to pass over to Sarah to talk about one of the specific kind of flagship study that we're doing, and then she's going to hand back to me to discuss some of the trials that we're doing. I want to start by kind of referencing the tagline that we had at the start of the presentation, which is bringing research opportunities to the Scottish community. And this is kind of summing up what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that people in Scotland, whether they're living with a neurodegenerative disease diagnosis, if they're concerned about their memory, or perhaps they're at increased risk due to family history, all kind of have access, or at least know about very latest in clinical research, and hopefully be well informed to make a decision about whether they want to get involved or not. And in large part, a lot of this has been kind of from chatting to patients and participants over the years. I personally get the sense that a lot of people in Scotland hear about a lot of these new treatments in this space through kind of BBC articles and headline news saying there's kind of big breakthroughs, but maybe think of those trials as happening in America or London and not necessarily things that are on their own doorstep, which hopefully is not true. There's lots of amazing research going on in Scotland, and Scottish Brain Sciences really wants to be part of that kind of collaborative effort. So in the next part of the talk, I'm going to go through who we are, what we're trying to do, and then I'll pass over to Sarah. So starting with our kind of background, Scottish Brain Sciences kicked off in 2023, headed up by Professor Craig Ritchie, and we've been running various studies ever since. Our central base is in Murrayfield Stadium in Edinburgh, in the actual stadium itself, which is quite fun. So if there's any rugby fans on the call, or Taylor Swift fans, if you've been to the stadium for any gigs as well, it's exciting for that point of view. And then from the kind of more sports angle, something that we're hoping to move into is looking specifically at research in kind of head injury and concussions and how they can be related to increased risk of dementia. We also have a lab in St Andrews, which is working towards providing a clinical service, and is looking at things like these fairly new blood-based biomarkers that are really have a lot of traction at the moment in the field. And there's kind of more to say about that in the future, but we're not going to touch too much upon that right now. But we're quite interested to see if people would be interested in finding out more about that, because I think that's something we could dedicate an entire webinar to down the line. So perhaps something for the Q&A section at the end. And we also have we've established a hub in Aberdeen as well, within the One Bio Hub building, this kind of Star Wars looking, very futuristic building that you can see on the screen as well. And that's been great because it's kind of expanding the opportunities that we're able to do up outside of just the central belt of Scotland, which is a point I'll come back to. But as a whole, Scottish Brain Sciences is trying to run clinical trials and also our own kind of internal studies which feed into those clinical trials, and build a bit of a community around this, to basically be able to try to help get discoveries from the lab through kind of proof of concept studies all the way to real patients in real clinics. Okay. So I'll just take a quick moment to talk about why we put such a strong focus on clinical research. I'm sure this will be familiar to a lot of people on the call, but just to kind of cover all bases. Every treatment we have today exists really because of things like clinical research. So whether it's a painkiller or antibiotic or one of the more kind of complex drugs we use in dementia, they all have to go through carefully designed studies really to prove, one, that they work, and two, that they're safe. So in the last couple of years, in something like Alzheimer's disease, it's become really important because, as you'll know, we don't yet have a cure. And the last couple of years has been really exciting because there's these drugs called monoclonal antibodies, or the MABs, as they're often called, like lecanemab or donanemab. And they've shown for the first time that it's possible to slow down the underlying disease process and not just treat symptoms. The effect of this is modest. There's a lot of debate around it, but it's undeniably a big shift in the field. So there's lots of kind of clinical research focusing on that at the moment. But it's not the only area. There's also vaccines in development, such as the RETAIN study, which I'm going to come on to a bit later, which aims to kind of protect memory and thinking in a preclinical population. And then there's also drugs looking at tau spread, as well as amyloid. But the key point is really that for these drugs to be proven, they need to go through these clinical research trials, and this is part of what we're doing at Scottish Brain Sciences. So the three main goals I have on this slide here. First is to test new treatments and that could change the course of brain diseases. Second is to develop new ways, better ways to diagnosing people earlier, so treatments can be given when they have a best chance of working. And the diagnostic landscape is also really kind of changing quite fast at the moment. So there's things that I referenced earlier, like the blood-based biomarkers, which are these simple blood tests that can pick up on the proteins like amyloid and tau, sometimes decades before actual symptoms would appear, which is obviously really, really powerful tool. There's also other things like digital cognitive tools. So instead of the kind of pen and paper tasks of the 1970s, there's now these kind of new assessments that are being developed that look at some of the earliest signs or symptoms that can be picked up on, such as navigation skills in Alzheimer's disease. You could use these kind of fancy VR goggles to figure out how people's navigation skills are changing. Or speech assessment is quite a big one. We've got a partnership on at the moment with a speech assessment company, basically looking at how communication can change and these kind of small and subtle changes that might be quite hard to pick up on without technology as well. So lots of exciting things in that area. And the third goal here is really to try and make the research as accessible as possible. Historically, lots of people living with dementia have kind of been excluded from trials, and specifically, a lot of people who would be involved in these types of research studies are often from kind of affluent areas or living close to places like the central belt of Scotland. And so we want to be able to kind of allow more inclusivity and ensure we're providing access and knowledge to people so they can make their own decisions about whether this seems like the right fit for them or not. And we're kind of constantly open to hearing new things or new ideas in that space. So if there is anything to discuss in the Q&A, if you have any ideas of ways we might want to branch out a bit more, we're all ears. We're really trying to make a push in that area. All these points kind of focus or relate to the Iona study, which is our flagship study that Sarah's going to get into. So I'll wait till she gets onto that section a bit later. So just to put this point into, or these points I've been making into a bit of a visual context, for something like Alzheimer's disease, the cognitive symptoms that might be seen in the clinic, so memory loss, language problems, executive function changes, are really the end kind of stage of what can be sometimes years or even decades of change in the brain. So by the time someone actually meets the criteria for dementia, the disease is already in quite an advanced stage. And so that's why actually treating it can be quite difficult, and because it is so widespread by that point. So what we are trying to do, and lots of other researchers are trying to do, is kind of look a bit earlier in the process. And the treatments that we briefly talked about, the monoclonal antibodies and the vaccines, are largely designed to kind of work earlier in the process before the kind of neurons are lost. So if we can intervene when it's just getting started, then that gives us a really good opportunity to be able to prevent it progressing to the symptoms of or dementia, the symptoms. And early detection doesn't just mean kind of better access to drug trials. It also means giving people the chance to kind of make lifestyle changes that can help protect brain function. So your classics, your kind of diet, exercise, and cardiovascular health. So this is kind of where Scottish Brain Sciences focus on earlier detection and tracking people over time, through something like Iona, which Sarah's about to chat about, is really important. And we have studies that aim to provide opportunities at that stage, but also across the spectrum. So many are targeted towards those with very early changes or new diagnosis. But as we grow as a company, we're trying to get different trials that kind of cater to different patient groups. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to Sarah to chat a bit more about Iona and how that links in with our clinical trials. I'll come back in a bit.
Super, thanks, Miles. So I'm going to introduce Iona initially. So this is our longitudinal cohort study, and I'll take us through the who, what, and why. And then I'll come on to one of our other studies as well. Next slide, please, Miles. So this particular study, the Iona longitudinal cohort study, we have a relatively broad set of inclusion criteria. So we are open to anyone who's aged 50 and above, who ideally lives in Scotland, but actually from an ethics perspective, we can recruit across the whole of the UK as well. It's just more around the kind of logistics of getting to one of our sites. It's much easier if you're based within Scotland, obviously, to reach our Edinburgh or Aberdeen centre. We do ask that people have a study partner, and that's for some of the assessments that we do. The study partner can be anyone who's aged 18 and above and knows the participant well enough to answer questions about how they generally cope in the activities of daily living, any symptoms that are emerging that might be starting to cause issues from a memory, thinking, functional point of view. We don't have a minimum amount of time that person does need to spend with the participant, though. And we recruit across a spectrum of people. So we will recruit from people who are completely healthy volunteers, no diagnosis of dementia, through to people who have already got a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, and then through to people who already have an established dementia. And that can be any cause. We do have a cutoff of an MMSE of 18 and above to be included within the trial. So that's how we operationalise this mild dementia cutoff. And that's just at the baseline. And largely it's around the assessments that we've put into the protocol. They are suitable for the healthy, prodromal, preclinical and earlier stages of dementia, but would start to become quite challenging as people have more advanced stages of the disease. Once someone's in the study, they are able to stay in the study, even if they've got a more advanced disease. And where we need to, we can opt out of particular assessments that might become a little bit more challenging for people to tolerate. And that's done on a participant by participant basis, because obviously everyone has slightly different things that might be easier and more challenging to do as their disease progresses. And we're recruiting up to 10,000 participants. Now, that won't just be in Scotland. That's obviously incredibly ambitious for quite a small country. But we are in the stages of opening up more globally as well. We will always make sure that we're kind of doing data-driven recruitment here as well. So it is relatively easy for these sorts of studies to recruit quite heavily within healthy 50 to 55-year-olds. So actually, we're always making sure we have a balance so that we can really answer the research questions we want to look at properly within this. So that's probably everything on the who, and any questions you have we can answer later on that. If we go to the next slide, I'll take you through the what. So we, as I said, it's a longitudinal cohort study. So we see people multiple times, and you can see at the bottom, we've got the visits listed out in a table there. So every other visit is a phone call. So we'll do a baseline visit. 6 months later, we have a relatively brief phone contact with both the participant and their study partner. 6 months after that, so 1 year post baseline, people will come back to one of our centres for a follow-up, and it will alternate throughout that. We have an approval in place for up to 10 years of visits. We would hope to continue to extend that by 5 and 10 year increments as we kind of reach that milestone. But right now we've got an approval in place until December 2033 for this. And for those of you who are familiar with either dementia research studies or kind of workups in clinical care for people with dementia, the types of information we gather probably will come as no surprise to anyone. So we do a number of questionnaires, like I've already highlighted. Some of that's with a study partner, but some of those are with the participant themselves, just to get a really good picture of what's going on, what's their lifestyle look like, how's their health generally. We take blood samples from everyone, and they're stored up in our laboratory in St Andrews. And on about half of people will do a lumbar puncture as well, and I'll come back to that in a moment. We do a battery of memory and thinking tests for participants, and these are designed to really detect the earliest changes. Some of them can be quite challenging, some of them are picked so that they align really well with either gold standards of what a lot of clinical trials in this participant population will look at, or what we know is more typical within clinical care as well, so that we're using, where possible, a bit of a blend of real-world assessments with that kind of really easy, or not easy to detect, but tests that are able to detect kind of the earliest changes. And then in half of those participants will do an MRI scan. And again, I'll come back to that in a moment. And then we do just a general medical history. So it's a checkup in terms of blood pressure, hearing test, height and weight, general medical history, and current medication. So we've built up a really nice picture of what people look like. In terms of the MRI scan and the lumbar puncture, so that's the same 50%. We'll ask people to do an MRI first, and only where it's deemed safe for them to have a lumbar puncture, as well as some routine clinical bloods showing that it would be safe for them to do a lumbar puncture, will we ask them to go to that stage. We ask people who either already have a diagnosis of a disease that causes dementia, or who are starting to perform a little bit below where we would expect on one of the cognitive tests, as well as randomly selected age and sex match controls. And there's a couple of reasons for that. It's probably not very helpful to make everyone go through this particular assessment and have that level of deep phenotyping for something that is just asking people to do a lot more logistically. It's another couple of appointments. Not everyone likes the idea of having an MRI scan if they're claustrophobic, or having a lumbar puncture if they've got concerns about that. So actually really narrowing it down to the people where this is likely to give really useful clinical information to them as well. For the lumbar punctures, we use assays that are approved within the UK, so we're able to feed this information back to people, but also where we're likely to, from a scientific perspective, get a really nice spread of people who represent those groups on the first WHO slide, from healthy volunteer to mild cognitive impairment to dementia as well. And if someone is selected for this and they really don't want to have either of these, or there's a contraindication to either of them, then that's totally fine as well. They can stay in the rest of the study. anything that does have a clinical meaningfulness to it, so beyond the lumbar punctures, that could be things like someone's blood pressure, or where we're using a clinically validated cognitive test, that would fall within that category. Where there's something abnormal with any of these, we will always feed that back to the participant, and then with their permission, give that back to their GP as well, just so that they can action anything. Anything where we don't know what the results mean, so some of the more research, memory and thinking tests, any analyses we do on samples that are for research use only and don't have CE marks, we don't feed any of that back because we don't have that context of what is and isn't useful. But that was something that we spent a long time working through with our patient and public involvement group to make sure that as much as possible we're able to feed back data to people whose data it actually is as well. Next slide, please, Miles. And so finally on Iona is the why. So we have three main reasons for doing this. The first two are really intricately tied together, and it's about understanding much more about the kind of science of these diseases, the underlying biology. So building up a cohort that represents the Scottish population and more broadly beyond this, to be able to understand much more about these diseases that cause dementias and follow the development over time. And that's why it's really important for us to have that spectrum of risk and make sure we don't have too many people representing one group or the other, so that we really can start to see what differences, if any, emerge in these groups. And then tied so nicely to that is risk prediction. So understanding much more about, can the data tell us more about where people are in their risk for disease? Can we find out anything about why people have that risk? And what do different risks look like over time? And again, eventually, this is something that we'd love to then be able to translate back into more kind of public health programs around, well, actually, this is what we understand much more about risk now in this cohort, and this might be something that we can translate into a modification for it. And then really importantly is future research as well. So like I said, we do disclose any clinically relevant information, and with that, some people will choose to take part in other research studies. So participants will consent for data and samples to be used in future research, and they will also opt in to find out about other research studies that they might be interested in that have similar aims. It's optional, so far everyone has done it, but it's always an option for people to take or not. And generally we find that it's a really nice kind of opportunity for someone to get involved in something else if they have found out, for example, maybe they are amyloid positive based on their lumbar puncture results. Having an option that they can take to do another research study is a really nice avenue to explore. So that's a very brief introduction to the Iona cohort study. We've got nearly 600 people involved currently in Scotland across our two centres. We've got people coming back for 1-year follow-ups up to their 18-month calls, and an amazing retention rate. So we're so thankful for all of our participants who have given up their time. They come back. We think we provide quite a nice environment for them, hopefully, to enjoy their visits with us. But it's just continuing to build this so that we get this opportunity out to more people. It's also a really nice opportunity for people for maybe whom a clinical trial might not be suitable. Maybe there are some health indications that means that there's never going to be kind of the right drug trial for them. But actually, this is something that they can really get involved in and kind of opt into as something that they might want to do. So on the next couple of slides, I'll introduce you to a slightly different study. So we wanted to give you a sneak preview into one of the studies that we've been working on over the last few months, which will actually be recruiting into GP surgeries. So if we go to the next slide, and we've got a similar who and then what, why. So we're going to be looking for 50 to 60 GPs, and here it is working in Scotland exclusively. So here we won't be taking anyone who works in other parts of the UK. It can be NHS or private, and we're looking for people who would be able to refer between 1 and 10 patients each. And the patients will be people who have memory concerns, where some additional information may be helpful. And importantly, the patient does need to be able to travel to Edinburgh or Aberdeen for their blood test. So the aim of this study, and I'll go on to that on the next slide in a minute, but is to find out much more about the emerging blood tests for Alzheimer's disease and whether they are helpful within a primary care setting. We have to have patients travel into our sites at the moment just around the stability of these tests and the challenges of doing that out in primary care settings. And they're people for whom some additional information, such as a result of a blood test, could be helpful. So it's not suitable for people where a diagnosis is 99% certain already, but actually where there is some kind of uncertainty and grey areas already. So if we go to the next slide, I'll give a bit more information on the what and the why. So the why, like I kind of touched on just then, is to explore whether 2 new blood-based biomarkers to rule out or rule in Alzheimer's disease pathology can be integrated into primary care. There's some amazing research studies happening across the UK that are testing this within secondary care as well. So this is designed to kind of really align with that. So between what's being led from a couple of the large English research centres and what we're doing, that overall as a scientific community, we get a much better idea of where do these tests best work for patient experience? How can we best integrate them within our UK health sector? Where are we going to see kind of the most benefit for people? And so to do this, we'll be asking GPs some questions around their confidence with diagnosis and how satisfied they are with the tests, because importantly, this needs to be something that's really user-friendly for GPs and fitting into really, really busy clinics. We'll also be doing blood samples with the patient, and we'll feed back results to both GPs and patients as well. This will be done once both of the blood tests we're looking at have full CE marking, so we're not disclosing anything that's kind of got a research label on. So it'll be at some point next year that we'll be kind of disclosing the blood results back to people. And we'll also be doing some focus groups to really start to understand what worked well about the process, what didn't work so well, what didn't we do that could have helped it to work. And we'll do those with both GPs and patients as well, so that by the end of it, we can come up with recommendations to say, this is what we found from the data, this is what we found from talking to people who went through the experience, this is what we would recommend if this were to kind of carry on as being something that would help with primary care. So that's a very brief introduction to 2 of our in-house studies and a bit of a flavour of the kinds of things that we do internally here. And it's a really nice step to hand over to Miles, who's going to tell you a little bit more about some of the clinical trials that we run.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Sorry, I moved you on from your slide too quick there. Great. Well, I'm going to start just by talking a little bit about what happens if somebody gets in touch with us, and then I'll move into the clinical trials. So we've got an imaginary participant or potential participant here called Fiona, which I only recently realised is only 1 letter away from, or has only 1 additional letter from Iona. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but if she was to come across our work, it would usually at the moment be because she's seen something in the press, and perhaps an article shared through the kind of local community, perhaps. Or we recently have been involved in a BBC documentary with Sally Magnuson, who was talking a bit about her own life and considering taking part in a research study. So there's been a lot of kind of interest through that. And she was, so let's say in this situation, Fiona was kind of interested enough to search out for us online. She would find through our website a contact form and then go through that route. Another route, of course, is if there is a healthcare provider or a GP who knows that Fiona is struggling with things like memory, they might kind of refer her on to us and suggest she gets in touch. So at that point, she would be booked in for a research consultation with a member of our team who will assess her current situation and hopefully be able to match her to a study. The kind of details that our team would be looking for here would be the kind of practical factors like age or age range, whether she has a diagnosis or is currently pre-symptomatic but maybe at higher risk, whether she has a study partner, as Sarah mentioned. The vast majority of the studies that we do involve having a study partner, and we have been looking at ways that we can try to involve people who might not necessarily have a study partner. It's usually a kind of a spouse or a close family member or friend, but they do need to see the person on a very regular basis, which can be tricky for some people. And so we've been kind of exploring ways to potentially find other routes to be able to provide a study partner for people. And also we would want to know whether she's able to attend the Edinburgh or Aberdeen site, or if she's a bit further away. We might want to keep her on the register for if we were to expand and have other sites down the line. Something we sometimes do is a very brief memory and thinking assessment over the phone. So we use something called the telephone interview of cognitive status, the TICS, which is about a 5 to 10 minute call. It's comparable to the mini mental state exam, which is often a entry criteria to get onto one of the trials, and it is indeed for Iona as well. A bit of a rough idea of where this person is sitting from a cognitive perspective, and gives us a bit more confidence that we know if they were to be suitable for this study, and we will be able to offer it to them. And that kind of ties into what we're trying to do really on Iona, but also in terms of doing these calls, is trying to reduce the instances of screen fails. So people who want to take part in a certain trial, for example, as I'm sure people on this call know, the windows to take part and the eligibility criteria are often quite tight. And sometimes people won't fit into those criteria after coming in and doing the initial screening assessments, which can be really disappointing and quite burdensome on people. So we want to make sure we try and reduce that as much as possible. And having these calls and being part of Iona can help us do that. So for many people, so going back to Fiona here, one of the first opportunities we often will give is for the Iona study, and joining up and then being able to be seen every year and collecting information. And at that point, over the course of her involvement in the Iona study, it might be that we realize, oh, actually, this trial is relevant to you, and we'd kind of tell her a bit more about it, and see if she was interested in taking part. But sometimes there are situations where somebody like Fiona might get in touch, and we already have a lot of the necessary information. So, for example, if she has a diagnosis or known biomarkers that she can tell us about over the phone, it might be that we think, actually, you know what, you might be able to kind of leapfrog Iona and potentially go straight to a trial. Iona is always going to be there if she wants to take part in that as well, assuming that the trial allows that co-enrollment, which many do. But that's another kind of route in there. So with that in mind, I thought I'd kind of go into a few of the clinical trials we have on at the moment, just as examples really, but to show you kind of what the spectrum of what we have on at the moment. Obviously, as time goes on, we will have different trials coming up, but these are the ones we have on the go. I was about to, when I wrote these slides initially, I was going to say 2 are currently running here and 2 are about to start, but actually as of late last week, 3 are started now, which is great. At the moment, we've got studies that kind of cater to lots of different patient groups, and I think these 4 here demonstrate that. So I'll briefly talk through each of these and give you a bit of detail. So the first one, Retain, which is a Janssen study. I referred to this at the start of the talk. It's a phase 2 clinical trial. It's quite different to the antibody drugs because it's a vaccine, and it's targeted for those, or at least the study is for 55 to 75 with preclinical Alzheimer's disease. And the first step of that eligibility criteria is a blood test for p-tau. But the vaccine really is designed to target abnormal tau. And the hope is that by training the immune system to attack that tau, you can kind of slow cognitive decline before the symptoms actually appear. It's randomized, so they will receive either a vaccine or the placebo. It's intramuscular injections in the upper arm, and it's at set intervals over the course of about 4 years. And like basically all the studies, over those 4 years, it will continue to monitor cognition, in this case, brain tau levels, biomarkers in the blood and spinal fluid, and also, again, as all these with the kind of safety and immune responses, it'll assess those over time. It's open currently in Edinburgh, and it's a good example of how kind of preclinical or prevention-focused trials are starting to come through the pipeline. Moving on to MK2212. This is an MSD study or a Merck study if you're in America. It's a phase 2 clinical trial. It's for people who have recently been diagnosed with MCI or mild dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. And it's for people who are 50 to 85 years old. It's an antibody that targets tau. And the idea is that by targeting tau early, it may kind of slow the spread and slow cognitive decline. Again, it's randomized, placebo-controlled, and it's they receive the drug through IV infusion every 4 weeks for around about 2 years. As with the retain study, it's got cognition, daily living assessments throughout that time, additional imaging and monitoring for any side effects. And it's currently in, it's about to start in Aberdeen and Edinburgh, which is exciting because it will kind of expand our reach up into the northeast as well. Moving on, we've got another catchy name, THN391 by Thruini Bio. It's particularly interesting. It's phase 1b1. It's studying a new monoclonal antibody, and it looks at the overlap between Alzheimer's disease and vascular health. It's designed for those aged 65 to 85 who have MCI or Alzheimer's disease, but they also need to have at least one vascular risk factor. So high blood pressure, high cholesterol or diabetes, those sorts of things. It's given by infusion. And again, it looks at the kind of safety and whether it can improve memory and thinking over time. The trial is open in Edinburgh at the moment, and it's run in collaboration with BDD Pharma in Glasgow, who do the kind of overnight stays over there. And this is a particularly exciting one for us, at least, because it's we were the first and actually second screened in the world for this study. So that was an exciting moment. And then finally, the one that I mentioned earlier that we opened last week is the Trontier study. It's a phase 3 by Roche. It's looking at trontinemab, and it's an antibody designed to remove amyloid plaques from the brain with the goal to slow disease progression by kind of reducing this buildup. It has a really wide age range. It's from 50 to 90. And it's for those who have recently been diagnosed with MCI, early Alzheimer's, or also for people who are currently under investigation for memory concerns or problems, which obviously opens out a new kind of area there as well in terms of recruitment. It'll be opening, it is open in Edinburgh. There may be people, or this might be quite a well-known one on the call. It made quite a splash at AAIC this year because it's got something called the Brain Shuttle, which I just love the name. Not really my area, but my full understanding of it is that basically it allows the drug to cross the blood-brain barrier really efficiently. And the kind of early Brain Shuttle phase 1 and 2 trials show that around 91% of participants reached PET amyloid negativity after about 28 weeks. So it's quite ambitious in terms of the extent of clearance and the speed of clearance compared to some of the past therapies. And again, it's an intravenous infusion as well. So as things progress, we're really keen to continue expanding this and providing trials that kind of cover that spectrum. And for people specifically on Iona who kind of over time maybe fit into certain criteria, we'll offer it to them. As Sarah suggested or mentioned, it's not something that we push on people. It's an option for people, and we just want to be able to provide those opportunities. If people want to take part, then they can. We want to kind of build up this research community, which allows people to be more aware of these types of trials that are taking place. So on that note, I'm going to pass back to Sarah to finish us off.
Super. And I just have a couple more slides and then we'll open for any questions. So if you do have anything that you'd like to ask us, do pop it into the Q&A chat and we should have at least kind of 15 minutes to go over any questions. So we're just going to end on how you can get involved. And if we go to the next slide, got just a very quick overview. So first, before I go through the actual slide, if anyone on the call actually is interested in joining themselves, we're happy to sign anyone up to our interest register who's aged 50 and above. If you're younger than that and you just want to kind of receive newsletters, everyone is welcome. We typically only have study opportunities for people aged 50 and above though, but we have lots of professionals who want to join in and get involved themselves as well. So everyone is always very welcome for that. But thinking more kind of in terms of if you're working with people who are living with or at risk of dementia and you think this might be something that they could be interested in, if you work with people who you think might be interested in finding out about our studies, you can refer them to us. So we have an email here. We can make sure that that comes out to everyone who registered for the webinar as well. It's nice and simple, info@brainsciences.scot. You can direct people to our website, and it's really easy for people to sign up there themselves as well. People can sign up on behalf of someone else as well. So actually, often we might have a family member who wants to help a parent or a spouse maybe to sign up, but actually they just prefer that the emails go to the daughter maybe. So that's possible as well. We can also, a lot of people on the call might be quite familiar with Joint Dementia Research. That's quite a nice kind of national level register to refer to. All of the research opportunities in Scotland are then available to people as well. Again, for professionals, we've started, this is kind of our first professionals learning event, but we've got a really exciting calendar coming a little bit later this year, and then throughout next year as well, with some really brilliant events. Some of them will be quite general, some of them will be targeted very specifically to particular professional groups as well. So if you want to come along to more of these, please just subscribe to our newsletters, get in touch. And share with any colleagues who might be interested as well. We spent the first couple of years really focusing on making sure we got our public event series set up, and we're going to continue to build those as well. But now we felt that now we've got a really nice community with our public members, we'd like to expand out to our professional colleagues as well. And then we're always happy to have people come down and see us as well. We know that for some people, research is a little bit of a kind of mystery black box, and actually just coming down to see some of the sites remove some of the mystery of that and see, you know, runs very much like any other clinic would. It's always nice to have a trip to Murrayfield. We've been here quite a few months now, and I don't think we get bored of walking into the stadium. So both our Edinburgh and Aberdeen sites, as long as we've got kind of a little bit of notice, we can have people into shadow, where we have shadowable visits as well. As long as participants are happy, we can you know, have people kind of meet people who are going through our research studies as well. The laboratory, like Miles said, we're going through kind of our accreditation process, so it's a little bit more challenging to visit that one at the moment, but certainly possible as well. But mainly our site's really, really easy to come down and see us and show a little bit more what we do. And the same is true for anyone who's thinking of registering as a participant. Not everyone is sure from having, you know, initial conversations, chats on the phone, email contact, whether they want to come and sign up or not. So they can just come down and find out a little bit more about what we do, meet the team, feel a bit more familiar. And then if that's something that they are happy with, then they can sign up to research studies as well. But it's a really nice kind of low pressure environment to be in. So that brings us on to the final slide as well here. So it's just our final question for you. So we're doing kind of increasing numbers of professional events, as well as public events. We go along to lots of different voluntary groups, to third sector organisations. We can do online, we can do in person, but we're always keen if there are places that are looking for kind of education on brain health or on education around research, or to find out very specifically about us. There is kind of no end to who we would love to talk to. So our final question is just up on the screen now. You can pop in an answer. If you've got any suggestions of teams you work in or teams you work with that you think actually this might really fit in with what they're looking for educationally, we'd love to find out about them as well. And we'll just leave that up on the slide for a couple of moments, and then we'll move on to the general Q&A. Okay, super. So we've got some nice suggestions coming in. So I'll just give just one more minute in case people are typing. The only annoying thing on Zoom is I can't see if people are typing still. And I can see we've got our first question in as well, so we can make sure that we start answering those as well.
What I'll do is I'll just leave the question available so people can answer it, and then yes, Sarah, there is 2 or 3 questions that we've got in so far, and just a reminder, if anybody else wants to ask the question, little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen with the question mark in it is where to submit them. So the first question we got is really for you, Sarah, and somebody's just asking how to get involved with the Iona study.
Yeah, really great question. So the easiest thing is to just register on our website. That will give us all of the details we need to reach out and get in touch. We always kind of, as someone registers, we'll just map out which opportunities they might have available and give them a quick call just to welcome them to signing up to us, explain about who we are, what we do, and then which study opportunities might suit them as well. Because Iona is the broadest, it generally is suitable for most people. So it's a relatively easy one to match to. The only caveat that we do have, like I said, is because it can be quite easy for us to skew a little bit too much towards younger, healthy volunteers. We sometimes have much longer waiting lists to book an appointment for that one. But other people registering for Iona, if they already have a diagnosis or a little bit older or have family histories, we can generally offer appointments a little bit sooner. So yeah, just on the website, pop in details and one of our team get back to you relatively quickly just with a bit of information and hopefully a match into the Iona study.
Thanks, Sarah. We've got another question in here about flyers and whether we have flyers in relation to studies that can be shared with professionals. So I'm happy to answer that one. And yeah, we have some very generic flyers that are just about Scottish Brain Sciences and how people can get involved. We are starting to build a bank of more information. We quite often get study specific flyers from the pharmaceutical companies as well that we can share. But yeah, we can make our flyers available. So if you had somewhere that you wanted to put them for people to pick up, we can, if you get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to send some out. We also want to start adding more information onto our website, actually, that gives people more information on the actual trials that we've got running and available at any given time. So yeah, watch the space. We'll keep adding more information. And if you've got an idea or something that you need from us, just get in touch and we'll see if we can create it. Okay, we've got another question related to Iona, Sarah, which is whether we've considered enriching the longitudinal data with functional data, and would there be partnership opportunities in this space, and how we would envisage that taking place.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm actually going to pass over to Miles initially, as this very much fits in with his expertise area. But then if there's anything that I can add at the end, I'll come back in. But yeah, Miles, over to you first for this one.
Right. I mean, the answer is yes. So we definitely considered it. Iona originally had some more kind of functional assessments, questionnaires, looking at kind of daily living activities of daily living. And we're kind of continuing to look into this space. It's quite a tricky one to assess, as I'm sure you know, and we are kind of open to ideas here. So absolutely, there are partnership opportunities. I couldn't make any kind of guarantees, but we're definitely keen to hear from different people. And as always, I guess it comes down to, do we have time to kind of research things from scratch, or are we kind of looking at new ones to purchase licenses for to add into Iona? So it's a bit of a balancing act, but the answer is yes, we are actively thinking about it and keen to hear from us. So if that is something that you'd like to get in touch about, then please send an email through to the info at Brain Sciences, or you can go directly to myself or possibly Sarah. Don't know if you had anything to add there, Sarah?
The only thing I would add is when we're onboarding kind of new either additions to the protocol or kind of add-on protocols that that offer the opportunities to our owner participants, but do something kind of additional so they're standalone, is we would normally work via our patient and public involvement group as well. So that means that we get a really nice input for what will and won't work really well, a bit of a sense of whether we are overburdening or not. And typically that's not the case, because we are thinking a lot about who is needed for these studies, what opportunities do we have, and how do we balance the portfolio really nicely. But they often add so much value to this as well. So where we do have partnerships about adding on, that's another part of the kind of service we're able to offer and bring to the table. Is we've got a group of over 100 people who help us out with reviewing our studies, reviewing study ideas and things like that, which is a really lovely thing to be able to do as a relatively small company. To have kind of put that really at the center has been really important for us.
I think the nice thing on the kind of clinical trial side, obviously we don't design those studies ourselves, so we don't get too much say in what they do or do not include in outcome measures, but at least in my experience, there seems to have been a shift in the last couple of years to include more of these kind of functional measures, which is super important, because if you're testing a drug and you're not testing that, then what's the point? If it's not having an impact on people's day-to-day life, then you're kind of missing a big area, I think.
Thanks, Bob. I've got one more question here related to joint dementia research, and whether, so somebody's saying they often talk to people living with dementia or their families and direct them to joint dementia research, and so they're asking whether they would then be directed to us. Yeah,
great question. I can start this, and if there's anything I missed, Miles can pick this one up. Big fan of joint dementia research. Happened to be one of the original sites way back when it started, over 10 years ago now, I think, when I worked in London. Wherever possible, we always make sure our studies are on joint dementia research, or where it's a clinical trial. Typically, nearly all of them go on to JDR now, but if not, we would typically advocate for that so that we can get our opportunities on there. And then our recruitment team will always just review, right, we've got this study, we've got these people on JDR who've expressed interest, let's get in touch with them and make sure. So it's a really good route in both to us and also any other research opportunities that people have available. Often, we can take direct referrals. It can be a little bit quicker sometimes, just to kind of speed people through and match them. But JDR is also a brilliant place to be able to refer people to. And it's often where we'll signpost people who don't fall into anything that we have. We do tend to get a lot of interest from people who live in England and who live a really long way away from Scotland, and JDR's our most common kind of signposting place so that people can get to research opportunities that's not necessarily us.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, well, that was all the questions that we had. So I just want to finish up by thanking everyone who took the time to join us over lunch today, and thank you, Miles and Sarah, for sharing the information.